Hello. So glad that you made the choice to join us here at the Greenbrier Church Online. This last week I was driving through our town when I noticed in my rearview mirror there was a motorcycle that was swerving in and out of traffic. They're using all three lanes. About the time they got up behind me, they jumped lanes again, causing the car in the right-hand lane to hit their brakes. We didn't have to go very far until we all had to stop at a traffic light. The motorcycle, me, and then two cars behind the motorcycle, the car that was originally cut off. I saw the guy from that car get out and throw an apple, one that they had apparently been eating, over two cars at the driver of the motorcycle. And then the light turned green, the driver got back in their car, and we all just kind of continued on to our destination like nothing had ever happened. We're in the middle of a series on the 7 deadly sins, and I understand there are some sermons, some topics that we have to start with stories in order to grab your attention to get you thinking about the topic at hand. But for many of us, we get ready for today's sermon every time we get in our car. If pride is the most subtle of the 7 deadly sins, then anger is definitely the most obvious. For one thing, no matter how much we try to hide our anger through pleasant facial expressions or kind words, eventually our anger is seen by our raised voice, our harsh words, our condescending tones, the way that we grumble or complain, the way that we throw a punch or apparently a half-eaten apple. Chances are pretty good that you don't have to go back very far in your memories to remember the last time that you got angry. I would imagine in the last week there was a time or two or three where you got angry and your anger boiled over. Frederick Buechner said of the 7 deadly sins, anger is probably the most fun, and I'm not really sure whether I agree with that or not. I mean, is anger really more fun than lust or gluttony? It might not be, but anger is certainly as popular. And while we try to hide our sin of pride or sloth or envy or lust, anger always shows itself. And there are times that we not only show our anger, we celebrate it. We talk about it being righteous. And I understand there are times that anger is a virtue. Anger is actually the only sin on the list of the 7 deadly sins that at times can be seen as a good thing. I mean, nobody would ever say that any of these other 6 sins are good, but there are times that anger is the appropriate response to something or someone. I mean, the Bible even says that God is slow to anger, so God even gets there sometimes. But of all the deadly sins, anger is probably the most tricky to understand and to deal with. Because while the other sins have to be overcome, anger has to be managed. We never talk about managing our lust, our greed, our gluttony. We're told to get rid of those things. But because anger is an emotion, we can never completely remove it from our lives. God's given us all of our emotions, happy, sad, mad, glad. In itself, anger is not a sin if we express it in a godly way. But anger finds itself on the list of 7 deadly sins because more often than not, we never express it in a godly way. Today, we're going to look through the book of Genesis, and over the last 2 weeks, we noticed how the serpent appealed to Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. The serpent said, God knows that when you eat of it, the fruit of the tree of knowledge and good and evil, your eyes will be open and you will be like God, knowing good and evil. Now, at first, I said this was an appeal to their pride. You can be like God. And then last week, I said that this was an appeal that caused them to envy. You deserve to be like God. But I noticed this week that it's also an appeal to their anger. God is keeping you from something that you deserve. Very early on, we discover that anger shows itself when we don't get what we want, or we feel like that somebody is withholding something good from us. Adam and Eve had everything, but they still struggled with this feeling that God is withholding something from them that they deserved, and that made them angry. And while that might be the first time that we see anger in the Bible, it doesn't take very long for it to show up again. We're going to be in Genesis 4 today, starting in verse 2, where we read, when they grew up, Abel became a shepherd, while Cain cultivated the ground. When it was time for the harvest, Cain presented some of his crops as a gift to the Lord. Abel also brought a gift, the best portions of the firstborn lambs from his flock. The Lord accepted Abel and his gift, but he did not accept Cain and his gift. This made Cain very angry, and he looked dejected. Cain's angry, and he's not doing a really good job of hiding it. The serpent doesn't have to show up and entice Cain to anger like he does with Adam and Eve. Something merely happened that Cain didn't like. He got mad. He looked dejected. Other translations say that his face was downcast. His countenance fell. His face was gloomy. The Jeremy Houck translation says that Cain was so angry that you could see it all over his face. No matter how hard we try, eventually our emotions are going to express themselves. When we're happy, we smile. When we're sad, we cry. When we're mad, we scowl, we frown, we look dejected. Emotions were never meant to be hidden or buried. They're meant to be expressed. We just have to make sure that we're expressing them in a way that brings glory to the same Lord, God, and Savior that created them. God was intentional when we were created to feel anger, because anger is one of those emotions that lets you know something's not right. Something's not working the way that it's supposed to work. That's why we get angry when we hear about somebody that was killed by a drunk driver, or a woman who was murdered on a college campus, or when someone hurts an innocent child. There's something actually inspiring about Martin Luther King Jr., who allowed his anger at racial injustice to put him on a course where he gave his life to fight for civil rights. But the problem is that I don't really feel the same type of anger at the injustices of the world as I do about the injustices in my life. There's not the same type of anger when I hear about domestic violence or starving people because of poverty as there is about the injustice of me having to sit in traffic, or when the person in front of me in the grocery store has coupons and then they have the audacity to pull out a checkbook. I mean, I might feel irritated when I hear about a criminal getting off on a technicality, but I get angry when my flight gets delayed or when my coworker doesn't pull his or her weight. It seems in our culture, our sense of justice is often skewed by our self-centeredness. We live life by what feels right for us or wrong to us. We get mad because things don't benefit us. I mean, if I have to wait more than 30 seconds in line, or when my spouse is not being as attentive as I'd like, or when someone else gets the promotion, I get angry. The story of Cain and Abel hits pretty close to home because, like us, Cain is angry over what he thinks is fair. And you know that in our minds, fair is only what benefits us. And since God's not being fair, Cain feels the need to take his anger out on somebody, and he chooses the person closest to him. Most of the time when we get angry with somebody who lives in our home, or a close friend, or a family member. And that might be because we spend so much time with them, or it might be because we care so much about them and that we've invested time and effort in those relationships. Or it might be because that person should have known better. You know, we have a tendency at times to get angry with the people out there, but we get the most angry with the people that we're closest to. I've had police officers tell me that the one call they struggle with the most is getting a call about a domestic dispute. Cops really have no fear about going into a place where there's a burglary or a mugging or a trespassing, because in those crimes, nobody really has anything against anybody else. It's the bloodiest crimes, though, that are the domestic crimes. When family members are fighting, domestic disputes get ugly, fast, and oftentimes dangerous. You never know what you're going to walk into, what they might do to each other, or how in an instant they might turn on you. You know, it's ugly when husbands and wives are fighting, but oftentimes it's deadly when brothers are fighting. And that's what's about to happen in our text. Picking up in verse 6, the Lord asked Cain, "Why are you so angry? Why do you look so dejected? You will be accepted if you do what's right, but if you refuse to do what's right, then watch out. Sin is crouching at the door, eager to control you, but you must subdue it and be its master. Anger is kind of like those warning lights that show up on the dashboard of your car. Those lights show up to tell you something's wrong, but you still have to do the right thing to fix it. If the battery light comes on in my truck and I go out and fill up the reservoir for my washer fluid, I might have done something, but I didn't fix the problem. Honestly, how many times have you gotten angry and then refused to address the real problem? How often were you angry and instead of talking about the real issue, you just settled on being short and snippy? How many times have you been passive aggressive and refused to return a phone call or a text, or intentionally do things that you knew would frustrate the person that you're angry with? Or worse, when was the last time you tried to justify or pacify your anger? You do understand the man sitting at his computer screen watching internet pornography is angry with his wife for something she said or didn't say, something she did or didn't do, but it's so much easier to just turn on the computer than it is to talk about their relationship. The woman that wears the numbers off their credit card at the mall is angry with her husband or her children for not giving her the attention or respect or help that she feels like she deserves. But it's a whole lot easier to just go do a little retail therapy than it is to calmly and rationally express your hurt and your frustration. Teenagers disrespect their parents because they're angry. They feel like they deserve something and it's being withheld from them. But it's a whole lot easier to just roll your eyes and slam the door to your bedroom than it is to have a conversation, to talk and to listen to your parents. When the warning lights of anger show up in our lives, oftentimes, instead of dealing with the problem, we make the choice to just pacify our pain by applying a healthy dose of pleasure. Or we lash out at someone who we believe deserves our wrath, or we do anything else just as long as we don't have to address the real issue. And what we discover is we only make matters worse. Look at what happens in verse 8. One day, Cain suggested to his brother, "Let's go out to the fields." And while they were in the fields, Cain attacked his brother Abel and killed him. Cain was angry. But instead of addressing the real source of his anger, he lashed out at the person closest to him, just like his dad before him. Cain tries to put the blame somewhere else. Adam said, "God, it's your fault that I sinned. You gave me the woman." Cain believes that it's Abel's fault, that God accepted Abel's sacrifice and not Cain's. And in his anger, he kills his brother. But that doesn't solve his problem. That doesn't deal with his anger. The only thing Cain accomplished was to increase the pain and the heartache felt by his family. Now his brother's dead. His parents are grieving. He's guilty now. He's afraid and actually more isolated than ever. Normally, when we think about and talk about anger, we think about rage and yelling and screaming or throwing an apple at somebody on a motorcycle. But human anger is always about control. It's this feeling that I'm in conflict and I need to win. If I yell loud enough, if I speak harshly enough, if I sulk long enough, if I strike hard enough, then I can win this conflict. I can control the narrative. I can make people do what I want and what I think they should do. The problem is human anger only gives us this illusion of control. The irony, of course, is that when we do that, we actually lose control rather than gaining it. We make things worse instead of better. I understand that most of us aren't likely to commit murder when we get angry, but if we were completely honest, there has been a time or 10 in our lives that we were angry enough to kill somebody. We just lacked the means and the opportunity. But every one of us are guilty of hurting people physically, or hurting them emotionally, or hurting them spiritually. Most of our anger is unrighteous because it has nothing at all to do with justice. Instead, it has everything to do with selfishness. I want to make it about justice. I want to excuse my anger because I just want things to be done fairly. And we invent all sorts of rationalizations to explain why we deserve what we want, why other people didn't give us the things that we were really owed. That's why I act this way. I need to claim my rightful share. I mean, I've even seen people convince themselves that getting angry in a church is a good thing because we're just standing up for what God wants. We're standing up for what's right. But the truth is that anger is unrighteous because the only reason I'm angry is because I didn't get what I wanted. I'm angry because I'm living by this me first agenda. When I get it in my mind that things have to go the way that I want them to, or somebody needs to pay, well, then my anger is always sinful. Anger, if left unchecked, becomes unrighteous and can quickly turn hurtful. Anger often leads to abuse, whether physical abuse or the type of emotional abuse where we yell, swear, threaten, throw things, or punch walls in an attempt to intimidate or to control someone else. Anger loses its ability to be righteous when it's hurtful or misdirected. Cain should have been angry, but he should have been angry with himself because he's the one who offered the poor sacrifice. But instead, he got angry with God and he took it out on Abel. When you get mad at the waitress because your steak is overdone, or when you yell at your kids because you've had a bad day at work, or when you lose your cool because you didn't make the red light, that's anger that doesn't produce the righteousness that God desires. Go back and look at what God tells Cain to do with his anger in verse 7. God says, "You will be accepted if you do what's right. But if you refuse to do what's right, then watch out. Sin is crouching at the door, eager to control you, but you must subdue it and be its master." God was telling Cain that he needed to learn how to master his emotions, or his emotions will become his master. Too many of us try to make the excuse that, well, I get angry because somebody made me angry, or I can't really control my anger. But the truth is that just like we choose to love, we also choose to get angry. When you get angry, you made the choice to get angry. Nobody can make you mad without you giving them permission. When you get angry, it's because that's how you chose to react. It doesn't matter how unfairly, unjustly, or thoughtlessly somebody treated you. You are angry because you made the choice to get angry, because you wanted that feeling of strength and power that you assume comes from being angry. You have far more control over your anger than you might want to admit. Don't believe me? Have you ever been in the car with your spouse and gotten into a fight with them while you were on your way to the mall, the grocery store, or to a restaurant? I mean, you and your spouse are going at it. You're red-faced, your voices are raised, you're just laying into each other, and then you pull into the parking lot. You get out of the car. What happens next? I mean, you and I both know what happens next. Your face changes from a scowl to a smile. You go from being hot-tempered to even-keeled. Your voice goes from being raised to greeting your friends in the restaurant with, "Hey, we're fine, we're great." You've controlled your anger. As we get ready to go to the tables this morning, I want to tell you a truth that you might not agree with, but it's a truth that's backed by science. The truth is, angry people don't pray. Now, before you get offended, let me share the science with you. Back in 2011, Ohio State University released the results of a series of studies where they concluded prayer helps people feel less angry and behave less aggressively after someone has offended them. According to their research, people who were provoked showed less anger and aggression if they made the choice to pray for the person who offended them instead of participating in that self-talk about what's fair and what's not fair that encouraged their feelings of hurt, despair, and offense. According to the researchers, the act of praying changed the way people thought about a negative situation. It helped them change how they viewed the events that angered them and helped them take it less personally. Now, before you discount that research, I just have to ask you, have you ever stopped and actually prayed in your anger? Have you ever approached the throne of God and trusted Him to deal with your irritation, your frustration, your aggravation? Have you ever prayed, Lord, help me with what I'm feeling right now. Take away this desire to get justice, to have revenge, to pay them back. Lord, I beg you to help me see that person as someone who is created in your image, and help me to choose love and mercy and forgiveness. You see, I believe that a heart that is connected to God in prayer is so full of holiness that there is no space for unrighteous anger.